Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On Attachment. In today's episode, we are talking about how to become someone that you actually like. So if you've been around here a while, you've probably heard me speak about self-love and my views on teaching self-love, which are that while self-love is a beautiful thing to aim for, a lot of us who really struggle with low self-esteem, low self-confidence, low self-worth can feel like self-love as a goal is really, really far away. And I know for me, when I was earlier on in my personal development journey, the idea of self-love felt like a performance. It felt really disingenuous for me to engage with self-love related content because it was just so incongruent with my reality and what my inner relationship really looked and felt like. And so it felt a bit forced. And I think that was really discouraging in some ways because, it felt like all of these people on Instagram and on the internet are really nailing this self-love thing. And that's just not how I feel about myself. So, maybe that's just not for me. And maybe you relate to that feeling a little deflated or falling into comparison traps around what self-love is meant to look and feel like. And the fact that it doesn't come easily to you means there's something wrong with you. So for all of those reasons, my preference and what I find to be more effective is teaching things like self-worth, self-respect, self-esteem, and tangible actions, things that we can focus on to actively cultivate those qualities with a view to becoming someone that you like. And I think self-love can follow later, but let's just focus in the first instance on, can I become a person that I like, that I'm comfortable with, that, I can stand behind and say, you know what, I'm okay with who I am. I like how I show up. There aren't these, glaring sources of internal friction or fracture that feel like I don't know who I am or I feel really out of alignment, all of those sorts of things that can erode our self-respect and take us further away from ourselves. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be sharing 5 tips, a mix of things to start doing and stop doing that will help you build genuine self-esteem and become a person that you like being, which I think is a really noble thing to shoot for. Now, before we get into today's episode, you might have noticed that this is episode 200 of the podcast, which is a really wonderful milestone. I started this podcast in April 2022. It was very much off the cuff. I remember sitting with my sister with a scrap of paper and brainstorming what I might call the podcast and coming up with all these things and just wanting to, get it done and get it out there. And so we circled on attachment and off I went. I recorded 3 episodes in one day, whipped up some cover art on Canva and went live the next day. So the whole thing went from idea to reality in less than 48 hours. And here we are 3 and a bit years later, 200 episodes. And safe to say the podcast has grown to something that has far exceeded anything I could have dreamed of. We've recently crossed over 7 million episode downloads. We've had over 700,000 unique listeners from over 150 countries, over 120,000 people who follow or subscribe to the show across Apple and Spotify, and over 5,000 5-star ratings and reviews. So if you've been here since the beginning or for a while, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your support. As I said, this all started in my living room and it still is something that I record and produce and edit and post everything. It is a one-woman show and it means the world to me to have your support tuning in, your kind words, the reviews that you leave. I read them all. I receive them all with so much gratitude. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you find something that supports you on your path. And I am so grateful to every single one of you. So a huge, huge thanks. The second very exciting announcement is that I have signed a book deal and am going to be writing a book, The Secure Self. It won't be out till, at this stage, probably early 2027. Things move a little more slowly in the publishing world than the online world, but nevertheless, I am incredibly excited to be working on this. It feels like a huge milestone and a beautiful way to share my work and my teachings with so many more people all around the world. The book will be about transforming anxious attachment from the inside out, which is really at the heart of everything that I teach. how we can tend to those parts of ourselves that we have maybe abandoned or neglected and build up a really safe, sturdy foundation from within that allows us to experience life and relationships in a totally different way. So again, this opportunity is in no small part due to all of you guys supporting my work and supporting my platform. So for that, I am immensely grateful, and I can't wait to share the Secure Self in book form with you in due course when it's out in the world. Okay, thank you for indulging my self-celebratory announcements for today. Let's get into today's episode, which is episode 200, How to Become Someone That You Like. Okay, the first one is get really clear on what it would mean to show up as someone you like. What would it mean to live in alignment with your values? Do you know what your values are? This might sound kind of basic, but most people who I work with can't answer that question very cogently. And I think that speaks to the fact that most of us sort of drift through our lives just trying to fit in or just trying to please other people, just trying to get some semblance of like, am I doing okay? Am I succeeding? Am I being a good person? Without having a really clear North Star in terms of what does that mean to me? What is my compass? And until we can internally source that and have real clarity around like, what kind of person do I want to be? We're not going to be in a very good position to audit where are the leakages, where are the gaps that we need to maybe close, where am I out of alignment with my values? Because in the vast majority of cases, it's not a mystery. So often people will come to me feeling really stuck and lost and confused, not knowing why they feel so horrible or why they have such low self-esteem. But it doesn't take much when you start scratching the surface. They might be in a shitty relationship where, their core needs are chronically unmet and they feel anxious all the time. They work in a job that they hate. They don't take care of their health and well-being, and then treat it as some sort of, there must be something wrong with me that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. Sometimes we're so deep in it that we can't really see it. And when we step back, it's like, well, yeah, of course, right? Of course I feel this way. Of course I feel stuck. Of course I feel lost. I have no clear sense of where I'm going. I have no North Star here. I have no sense of my values. So I have nothing to reach for. I have nothing to align myself to. We really want to have a scaffold, which is like, what would it mean for me to be a person of character and integrity? And until you know what the substance of that is, it's going to be really, really hard to become someone that you're really comfortable being, because that's got to come from within. It's not about looking around you and saying, what will make people like me more, because the more that you rely on that as the barometer for whether you are a successful person or whether you're doing a good job, it just takes you further and further away from yourself. And particularly if there's a trade-off there, if in becoming someone that other people like or, putting on that performance and approval seeking means that you're behaving in ways that are out of alignment, that are incongruent with who you want to be, and leaves you with that residue of not feeling good about yourself, that's a really high price to pay. So get really clear on what would it mean for me to be a person of character and integrity, and where am I maybe not meeting the standards that I would like to set for myself in that regard, and then start closing the gap, right? We really have to be quite ruthless in auditing where our choices, our actions, our behaviors are not meeting the mark. And that is all within our control. And that's a really good thing. As much as self-responsibility can hold a bit of a mirror up and can be uncomfortable, it's also, in my mind, extremely empowering because we have agency over that. And I find that to be a much more inspiring message than just saying, I don't know why I'm stuck, and telling ourselves that we're powerless over that. Okay, number 2, which is kind of related to number 1, get really clear on your boundaries, right? Set, honor, enforce, fiercely protect your boundaries, particularly as they relate to your well-being, which is really what boundaries should be about. I think boundaries get thrown around so much. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misuse or misappropriation of what this whole boundary thing is about. I did an episode maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago on boundaries versus ultimatums, and I sort of stepped through what all of these different things are: boundaries, requests, ultimatums, deal breakers, and the role that each plays in a healthy relationship or not. So you can go back and listen to that if you want more of a deep dive on this particular piece. But I think the crux of it is, until we take our own boundaries seriously, which means not tolerating things that you say you're not going to tolerate, not continuing to participate in interactions, situations, circumstances that actively drain and deplete you, that leave you feeling consistently worse off. And this can be relationships, it can be friendships, it can be work settings, all of these things that you know really reliably are not good for you. And yet you continue to engage, you continue to participate because getting other people's approval or keeping the peace or keeping your head down or not causing a fuss, not being difficult, all of these things you're putting above your well-being. And that to me is a boundary problem, and it is always going to come back to bite you. It is not something that you can just keep burying away and pushing down, because the body has to hold all of that. And sooner or later, we become physically and or emotionally unwell as a result of that. And so really, our boundaries are there to protect our well-being. And until you start leading the way on that, and until you start honoring yourself enough and respecting yourself enough that that is more important to you than keeping the peace, than seeking other people's approval, than, just doing what you're told or performing or whatever it looks like for you, like that's got to come first. You've got to signal to yourself, I matter. My well-being matters. I am a precious thing that is worthy of feeling safe and cared for and supported and living in a sustainable way. Anything short of that is very, very damaging to our self-esteem, because it sends the opposite message, which is basically, this doesn't feel safe, but I'm going to do it anyway because all of those other things matter to me more than my sense of safety and well-being. So get clear on what your boundaries are. It's very, very important work in transforming your relationship to yourself. Okay, next up is pay close attention to who or what brings out the worst in you. So again, this is really asking you to get honest about, how am I showing up? And are there people, social groups, situations, environments that consistently bring out, elicit parts of me or expressions of me that I don't like, that lead me to be angry, frustrated, bitter, resentful, scorekeeping, that kind of mentality, or, that lead me to be really out of integrity. Maybe certain friendship groups where I'm really judgmental and gossipy and, bitchy, or whatever, all of these different things that can be shadow expressions of ourselves. And we maybe go along with it because that's just the status quo in that environment or with those people. And then afterwards, we're left with this icky residue of, I don't like how I was. I don't like the way that I handled that. I don't like the way I showed up. But for some reason in those settings, I always go there. I always reach for that. It always brings out parts of me that I maybe want to shift, that I'm not really comfortable with, and that I know are betraying, again, like my sense of who I would like to be, character, integrity, morals. I know for me, when I was in my early 20s and I really struggled with a lot of things, but like stress from work, I would work so much. And then I had a lot of social anxiety. So we'd go out and drink a lot after work, and I would just use alcohol as a way to alleviate that social anxiety. And then, I'd wake up the next day and just feel like such an anxious, insecure mess, because I'd gone from, one version of myself that felt really uncomfortable and insecure, and then I'd reached for alcohol to kind of make that feel less uncomfortable. But then I'd, show up in ways that I didn't like, and then I'd feel deep shame and embarrassment the next morning. It was just a really unpleasant cycle, and that shame and embarrassment that I'd then carry would lead me into the cycle again. So a big part of my own growth was getting really honest about that and going like, okay, when I drink a lot, I don't like who I am. And it's really important that I take ownership of, if I feel this way every time I do XYZ thing, like that's on me. I have to see the writing that's on the wall there. I have to acknowledge that this really consistently leaves me feeling like shit. This really harms my own sense of self-esteem, my own comfort with who I am. And that's not something that I can, in good conscience, continue doing while also saying that I'm trying to work on myself, right? So again, this will look different for everyone, but starting to think like, are there certain things that reliably bring out parts of me that I don't like, that feel shadowy, that feel kind of energetically unclean, for want of a better term? And what might it look like to start moving away from those things? And to be clear, this is not about like blaming and shaming ourselves. It's just about discernment and knowing ourselves and really actively prioritizing the conditions that allow you to thrive, to feel good, to show up as the person you like, rather than putting yourself in situations that you know pretty reliably bring out those parts of you that maybe you don't feel so good about afterwards. Okay, next up is ruthlessly prioritize your well-being and your vitality. So I don't mean this in the sense of a picture perfect, Instagram performance of self-care, but I do think that it is very, very hard to have a healthy relationship with yourself if you do not treat yourself well, if you do not actively support your health and well-being, if you do not make choices that support your energy, your vitality, your aliveness. And this can look like so many things. I did an episode maybe a month or so ago about pleasure, rest, and feeling good in a culture of chronic burnout and busyness. And for a lot of us, that's a really uncomfortable thing. Slowing down, resting, inviting in more pleasure and sensuality and goodness as a baseline feels like we're maybe doing something naughty, like there's guilt attached to that, like we've never accomplished enough to allow ourselves to slow down, or maybe our nervous system just is so uncomfortable when we are used to operating at this hum of chronic stress that just slowing down and resting feels unsafe or uncomfortable. So there are lots of different layers here. Our modeling around self-care, whatever that might have looked like in your family of origin or your community, a lot of people have coding that self-care is very self-indulgent and there's no time for that, and, keeping busy and working hard all the time. So there can be a lot to unpack here. But the point stands that I think it's really, really hard to have a deeply rewarding, aligned relationship with yourself that is based on burnout and pushing yourself past your limits over and over again. So allowing yourself to regularly feel good, to rest, to relax, to be present without feeling like you have to earn that or like you're doing something wrong. I think that's a really important part of, again, signaling to your system that I'm worthy of this, that it's safe for me to rest, that I don't have to prove and strive all the time. And I think that allows us to then show up to all aspects of our lives more powerfully, with more energy, with more vitality, with less resentment and bitterness and, being less frayed at the edges. And I think that's really undeniably a win-win for everyone, for ourselves and for the people in our lives. Okay. And last but not least, seek out opportunities to make yourself proud. Now, I think that really one of the most powerful experiences we can have in terms of our relationship with ourselves is being able to honestly, hand on heart, say, I'm really proud of myself. Right? To experience a sense of accomplishment that feels deep and profound and well-earned, like we've overcome something hard and we've proven to ourselves what we are capable of. That is not to be underestimated. And I think that when we can have those moments of saying like, yeah, I'm really proud. I'm proud of how I showed up. It doesn't have to be some outward achievement, right? This doesn't have to be like getting a promotion. It could be, I'm proud of myself that I spoke up for something that wasn't right for me when it would have been so much easier to bite my tongue. Or I'm proud of myself that I set a boundary with my boss and said that I wasn't available to work over the weekend, even though historically I would have just said yes and done what I was told. There are so many little things, opportunities to step into these things that feel foreign and that feel uncomfortable and that feel like a stretch. But when we do it and we stand in that wobbly space, in that messy middle between our comfort zone and what lies beyond it, that is very, very powerful. It's very transformative. And it shows our system that like, I can survive the discomfort of that because I'm strong and I'm committed to doing hard things, to challenging myself, to showing myself what I am capable of. So actively seek out opportunities to be courageous so that you can say, I am really proud of myself. To stretch yourself, to prove to yourself that, those limiting beliefs and the stories you might have about what's possible for you and, what you're capable of. Seek out opportunities to disprove those stories and to show to yourself that actually you can change those things, that whatever it is that you might be struggling with in terms of your beliefs about yourself or the things that feel a bit sticky in your life, they're not fixed, they're not permanent parts of you. And it's over to you to actually take steps towards a different way. And doing that, even deciding to try, can be really powerful in allowing you to feel like you're proud of yourself. So don't underestimate the impact of that. It is really, really profound. Okay, guys, that was 5 tips to learn to like yourself more. I'm going to quickly recap them because I know that got lengthy. The first was get honest about what's out of alignment so that you can audit the gap between who you're being and who you want to be, and that you really have your values and your sense of integrity as a scaffold that you can be led by in all of your decisions across all aspects of your life. The next one was set and honor your boundaries. So get really clear around what boundaries do I need, what parameters, what guardrails do I need in order to protect my well-being, my safety, my energy. All of that is worthy of protecting, and getting really clear on what that looks like for you is a really important way of building self-esteem and building self-respect and in turn liking yourself more. The next one was pay close attention to who or what brings out the worst in you or the parts of you that you don't really like, behaviors that you're trying to shift away from. Be very deliberate about funneling your time and energy towards the people, places, activities that bring out the best in you. The next was to ruthlessly prioritize your well-being and vitality. So take your self-care very seriously. You deserve to feel good. You deserve to rest. You deserve to live from a place of vitality and fullness and aliveness rather than one of depletion and burnout. And last but not least, seek out opportunities to make yourself proud. So challenge yourself, stretch what you think you're capable of, prove your limiting beliefs wrong, and that will work wonders for your self-esteem and your ability to say, I'm proud of who I am. I like myself. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this episode 200 of On Attachment. As always, so grateful for your support, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks, guys.